All right, welcome all of our viewers to episode 4 of MVP Podcast. We're excited to have you guys back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our last episode. It was just me and Natasha talking about contractors, questions to ask, things to do. So if you haven't checked out that show, take a look back, find that episode. For all you DIYers, it is a podcast that's going to be useful. So take a look back. If you find some little nuggets that you like, share them with us. We'd love to hear from you. But jumping into today's show, we have Lauren Speidel coming to talk about 1031 exchanges. So this is going to be a show not right aligned with Adam, who was the last financial leg that we brought in. But Lauren does bring some insights on that financial side that is important for any real estate investor looking to build their portfolio or exit. She would have some great knowledge on 1031 exchanges, which I'm going to leave Lauren to explain it. But I just want to introduce Lauren. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I know that we have talked a little bit beforehand about 1031 exchanges. So I'm excited for you to share not only the knowledge about this tax strategy in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, but from when we talked in the past, the history lesson that she offers on how this came about and why it is in existence today was my greatest takeaway from talking to you before. So hopefully I didn't blow that up too much and put you on a pedestal here where you got to give us some deep background. But what you shared before was just fascinating stuff. So I'm excited to hear about that. But first question I always ask every guest on the show, tell me a little bit about your background. What led you into your career where you're at now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm definitely in a niche market. When I went to college, I had gone to be a English teacher. I graduated with an English degree. Left college, or graduated from college, I should say, and started working for a mortgage company. I worked for that mortgage company for just a couple of years as a mortgage processor, and then worked for a very large commercial real estate firm in the Chicago area for close to 10 years. And that's really where I learned about 1031 exchanges. And then I've been with Exeter now for a little over 3 years. And again, very, very niche market. And I love to hear how people get into real estate as well, because it's definitely not something that usually people plan for. They kind of fall into it. But yeah, so been with Exeter now for about 3.5 years. I'm the regional manager for them. And we do all different types of exchanges, forward, reverse, improvement. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. And what I like to hear the most about it, and I think we mentioned this on every show, everybody's path is different. You went to school for English and you end up in financing for real estate.
Yeah.
Natasha and myself, we went over the first show about our backgrounds, not to do with real estate. But you find it, you love it, and you keep growing and you keep becoming, I say obsessed with it. But as you grow roots in it, it just grows and grows and you find your path. And I mean, you found your path, which is exciting. And it sounds like you enjoy it.
I do. What I love about 1031s is that every single transaction is different. So I'm constantly learning. Once you get to a point
absolutely.
where you stop learning, I think
I always like to hear the experts in their field
anymore.
talk about learning and growth. And there's never going to be a point where you know everything about 1031 exchanges, but you'll know more than everybody else, which is a great thing. I'll never know the most about real estate. I just hope to know more than what I did yesterday and a month ago and the people that I'm surrounded by, I guess.
Yeah.
But I always keep the people above me. You got to learn from somebody, right?
Yeah.
So, but jumping into, now we're going to go nuts and bolts of 1031 exchanges, but we're going to start at the top. First question is, what is a 1031 exchange?
Yeah, a 1031 exchange is a tax code. It's Section 1031, and it allows you to take property that you've held for investment purposes. Investment purposes are going to be rental income, appreciation, so vacant land typically falls into that, or something that you've used in a trade or a business, which is typically commercial space. And you can sell that asset, you can defer the tax liability associated with that sale, and have your full net sales price working for you in another asset. So it can be great for someone, as we all know, when you own a home, you have a tax benefit from that. It's a great way to build your wealth. And when you sell it, you have an exclusion on that gain, or at least a portion of that gain. With an investment property, you don't have anything that will defer your tax or will exclude your gain. So most investors, when they kind of get into investing, they don't really realize how much tax liability they may have upon sale. Usually what we see is somewhere around 30 to 40% in taxes off of the gain, which is a huge chunk. So if you plan on reinvesting, if you're looking to build your portfolio, you're in that building stage, an exchange can certainly make sense. And a little history on exchanges. Prior to it actually being a code, it became a code in 1921. So we're coming on 100 years. We would see farmers barter for livestock, barter for land. So it was very commonplace to have these types of arrangements. And for the most part, until the mid-1980s, people would sell and buy their exchange properties usually the same day, same closing table in some instances. We would call that a simultaneous or a concurrent exchange. But now that's not how exchanges work. You have a certain time period to complete them. And it all changed due to a court case back in the 1970s. So T.J. Starker was a timberland owner in the Pacific Northwest, and he sold his timberland to a paper mill company. The name of them is Crown Zellerback. And Crown Zellerback gave him units to trade for properties, and they would present properties to him for replacement. And if he liked them, he would trade in his units. And he was given units because you cannot take the cash from the sale, otherwise it's a taxable event. So that's why they gave him units. And over a period of 5 years, he traded in his units and eventually filed his taxes, filed the exchange. He was audited by the IRS. He paid the tax, but took the IRS to court for 4 years and eventually won. And that's really when the IRS amended Section 1031 to state that you do not have 5 years to complete an exchange. You have a much shorter period of time, which is 180 calendar days. So that case really kind of amended what we now see as a 1031 exchange in the time frames.
That is, I absolutely love that history lesson to find out where this came from. The saying is, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, kind of thing. So knowing like where this all comes from and how it came to be and how it can work for you from where it came is just a fascinating thing. So I appreciate you sharing that little bit of knowledge. I didn't even put the whole 100-year mark on there, so I'm going to be looking for that parade for everybody to go celebrate. I'm going to be there 100%.
Okay.
You just let me know where it
We'll
is.
make t-shirts.
I'm guessing that's going to be kind of by your office, so we're going to Chicago for that one.
Sounds good.
I cannot believe that they were able to do exchanges the same day. Like, with your line of work and how many moving pieces are involved in that, to think of doing that in one day gives me anxiety.
Surprisingly, it happens. It happens. I don't want to say often. Most exchanges are what we call delayed exchanges. But if you can time it right, it certainly can work. A lot of times what we see for concurrent exchanges is because the replacement property, the seller of that replacement property, wants to sell as soon as possible. Maybe there's been an extension, and so they agree upon, once they sell the relinquished property, to immediately purchase that replacement. But yes, everything's got to align.
Yeah, perfectly, which is a feat. But just diving more into the dates and those timetables that we have, you are very specific with the words that that you used on 180 calendar days. Did I hear that correctly?
You did.
So with that, that means, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 180 days to isolate your property?
Yes. So if your closing was today, tomorrow would start the first day of your exchange period. And you have a total of 180 calendar days to purchase a replacement. Ultimately, the first 45 calendar days of that period, I would say, is the most critical, because that is when you actually need to identify your possible replacements. So we would give our client an identification form where they're going to list the properties they're interested in purchasing, and we need that back by your 45th calendar day. And then you have another 135 days after that to close on something that you identified.
Right. And you were talking about properties, multiple. You don't have to just isolate one, correct?
Correct. There are three methods to identify replacements. The most common is the 3 property rule, which means that you can list 3 possible replacements. So 1, 2, 3 Main Street, 4, 5, 6 Main Street, 7, 8, 9 Main Street. You've identified 3 properties. If you want to identify more, you can look at the other 2 options. The second option is the 200% of fair market value rule, which means that, let's say you sell your property for $500,000. That is the gross sales price. You can identify double what you sold for. So you would be able to identify $1 million worth of real estate. So in that situation, let's say that you identify 4 properties for $250,000. So you would add up all those values, and you cannot exceed that $1 million mark. The third option would be the 95% exception, which allows you to identify as many properties as you want, but you must close on 95% of what you've identified. So it's not as commonly used, of course. So I would say 90% of our clients use the 3 property rule. And so you'd identify that on the form, and during your 45 days, you can amend your form as many times as you want, but after you pass your 45th day, you cannot amend your form again. So you'll want to have a good idea of what you may want to purchase during that time period.
Yeah, because if you're after that 45 days and you don't end up closing on one of those, and I know we were going to talk about this too, it's not necessarily a penalty. Like, you're not going to get hit with some sort of fine or fee. Can you go into that kind of aspect where, all right, I isolated the next 3 properties that I wanted, and I lost all 3 of them? What kind of happens in that situation?
So that would be a failed exchange, as we call it. There's no penalty from the IRS for attempting a 1031 exchange. The only time you'd actually receive a penalty from the IRS involving an exchange is if you are audited by the IRS. They determine that you have a disqualified exchange, so you've done something wrong. And then at that point, you would be responsible for the tax liability, possibly a penalty, possibly interest on when it should have been paid originally. But for attempting an exchange, there is no penalty. So we definitely have clients that maybe last minute they learn about a 1031 because they've talked to their tax advisor, and they're opening an exchange, and they're going into it very quickly, and they think, at least it's going to give me 45 days to figure out if I can accomplish this. And if they can't, eventually the funds will be released to them. They're going to file their taxes, and at that point when they file their taxes is when their taxes due.
Gotcha. No, that's interesting. And you said something in there that I just wanted to touch a little bit more on, where there is an aspect where you didn't use the word illegal, but it's not the failed, but something happens where you didn't follow the code to how it needs to be done correctly, where there could be a penalty to it. In your history or what you've seen, what's the most common, if there is one common theme or one common hiccup that would cause that to happen?
That's a good question. The first thing you have to think about is being audited. And when you talk about 1031 exchanges, I'll kind of preface this. whenever you're talking to a qualified intermediary or you're talking to your CPA or tax advisor about an exchange, you'll hear the term audit a lot, or you might hear if you're audited, and that's because the IRS is not going to review your exchange unless, of course, you're audited. And if you're audited, that's when they may decide to dig into your transaction and see exactly if the transaction fit all of the requirements. I can't say that there's anything specific that comes up that may cause a disqualified exchange. There are so many different things and so many moving parts that
Right.
might lead that way. I think ultimately it's really important for the client, for the taxpayer to do, is to share as much information with a qualified intermediary as possible. As a qualified intermediary, we are here to help advise. We're here to help structure. If your CPA or your attorney has questions, we're here to assist them. But we're not mind readers. So if someone only shares a portion of what's going on with the transaction, there's only so much that we can advise upon. And so to help yourself and to have our clients have a successful exchange, our recommendation is tell us everything. And then from there, we can try to read in between the lines and say, okay, that could be an issue. Okay, that might be an issue. And our goal is to not tell our client what you can and cannot do. Our goal as a qualified intermediary is to make sure that they understand the rules and requirements with an exchange, and if they're diverting from that at all, that they're comfortable with the risk associated with their transaction. So they have to be comfortable with risk. You kind of have to understand their risk tolerance. But that's really up for the taxpayer and the tax advisor to determine if it makes sense for them to move forward.
Right. And you guys would go through your due diligence with your client that you have in to make sure, but the transparency would help with that. So I definitely see those going hand in hand with that. And from what we've spoken on before, you and your team seem to be very good with talking to the CPAs that you have or the attorneys that you work with so that you can kind of take this on as a group rather than, hey, Lauren, here's this, try and figure it out.
I mean, when you're looking at an exchange, there's so many moving parts. A lot of times we get the call saying, well, what will my taxes be if I don't do an exchange? Unfortunately, number one, we cannot be viewed as an agent of the taxpayer, so we can't provide legal and tax advice. Otherwise, we disqualify ourselves from being a qualified intermediary. But that CPA is going to know what tax bracket they're in. They're going to know if they have passive losses to offset gains. They're going to know how the property's been reported. All of these really important things that, surprisingly, a lot of clients don't know. They don't know until they start asking those questions to their advisors.
Yeah. No, that is a great point. In going back a little bit in terms of the properties being used, you kind of touched on it a little bit in that last about disqualified exchanges. These are just for investment properties. So you can't just own a single family home and use a 1031 to buy your next $1 million mansion. But I was going to have you touch on a little bit with the intent. We talked before and you had mentioned intent and you've said it multiple times. And I know that it's a key thing for you. It's the intent factor of it. Can you touch on the intent side of your property or your real estate that you have?
Yeah, I would say intent is probably one of the most critical components to an exchange. So with a 1031, you must have the intent to hold the property. So that's kind of the first thing to consider. If you're purchasing a property with the intent to sell it, so let's say you're a fix and flipper. You're buying a property, you're putting $50,000 into it, and you're going to sell it. That doesn't qualify for exchange treatment because your intent is not to hold. Your intent is to sell. If you're a developer, really you're looking to develop an asset, and your goal is to sell it. So that wouldn't qualify. Developers typically don't qualify for exchange treatment. Usually their property is actually considered inventory by the IRS, so it wouldn't qualify regardless. But intent to hold is key. So most most experts in the exchange field will recommend that a client hold their relinquished and their replacement property for between 12 to 24 months, because that's proving that you had the intent to hold. So let's say you have a rental property and you've owned it for 2 years. You're going to have rental income on your tax return for 2 to 3 tax years. So if you're audited, you can easily show, I did have the intent to hold. That's exactly what I did. I held it. I reported the rental income.
Mm-hmm.
Now, intent can certainly change. You could go into a transaction thinking, okay, I'm going to fix it up and I'm going to sell it. And you fix it up and think, you know what, it's probably a better market right now for me to rent this property. I can probably do better renting it. So now you get a renter in there, and you rent the property for a year or two, and now it qualifies for exchange treatment. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your original intent. You could have a property that you've held as a primary residence. You move out, you make it a rental property. Now it may qualify for exchange treatment. In the code, in Section 1031, there's no verbiage that states that you have to own a property for any specific amount of time. So let me make that very clear. You could hold a property for 2 months and have had the intent to hold it, and something changes that intent. We had a client who purchased a replacement property in Florida, and their goal was to rent the property. It was a condo. They did not read the CC&Rs. They did not realize they couldn't rent the property. They immediately put it back up for sale, sold it within 45 days, and bought a property they could rent. They were audited by the IRS, and the IRS said, wait a second here, you only own this property for 45 days. To us, it looks like you didn't have the
Definitely
intent
a red
to hold.
flag.
You had the intent to sell. He could provide documentation and explain what his original intent was, and the IRS actually gave him a pass. So, it's really important, if you can, to document your intent, to have, emails, things like that in place in case of audit and in case your transaction doesn't fit a very clean exchange.
Yeah, and that has to be a scary moment for him. I don't know the background of like his portfolio, but to get into that situation where the condo docs don't let you do what you intended to do, and now you're sitting on this where you could have a huge tax liability.
Absolutely.
That's a scary moment.
And I believe it was the
talk
IRS
about
that audited him. It could have
risk
been a state,
tolerance.
but regardless, he was able to argue that audit, and he did win.
That is awesome. I'm glad to hear, because that's just it's an error that happened, and that
audits are scary.
They are.
I haven't had one yet, but I remember when I owned my business, I was always scared every year around tax time.
Yeah. So we'll stay clear of those for the time being. But yeah, that is I couldn't imagine being in that guy's shoes, with that amount of risk that's out there weighing on a decision. But good for him to keep all of his documents and his correspondence. I wanted to touch on more of the client side of things. I think we went through the X's and O's enough here to get people a picture of what 1031 can do and how it can benefit them in their portfolio. But in terms of the clients, what type of clients do you normally take on? Is it you have to be $1 million and up? Can you take someone who's just starting and has one single family rent?
Yeah. The numbers, we get that call a lot. We have people that call and say, I'm only selling a property that's worth $150,000. Can you be my QI? The value of the property to us is irrelevant. You may have a very, smaller scale portfolio and still have a significant tax liability. You may not even be getting much equity out of your transaction. Let's say, for example, it's highly leveraged. That doesn't mean that you won't owe tax. Ultimately, a qualified intermediary costs, on average, somewhere between $600 to $1,200. So, usually what we say is take a look at your tax liability and from there decide, if it makes sense for you to do a 1031 exchange. I've got some clients that say, I don't want to send one extra dollar to the IRS if I don't have to, so I'm doing the exchange. And I have others that say, you know what, my gain's not that large. I'm going to go ahead and pay the tax and decide to invest it when it's right for me, which is perfectly fine. So I wouldn't say it is someone who has a large or small portfolio. I would say it's someone who is most likely either in the building stages of their portfolio, so they're really looking to use every dollar into replacement, or someone who maybe you're someone older that doesn't want the headaches of owning property, that are like kind to real estate, are like kind to exchanges, but just not hands-on. So you're kind of in the back seat, just reinvesting your equity. So there's a lot of different types of investors where this might work. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing to look at is to find out what your actual tax liability may be, and then from there make the decision if it was right for you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you touching on that, because I wanted to make sure and let the audience know that you don't need to be a 20-year veteran with this huge, large portfolio to take advantage of this tax option. This can be done for someone just starting, or only has 2 properties, or just bought their first fourplex, or have owned their fourplex for a year. And I just want to make sure that people out there know that this is an option for anybody, as long as it's right for you. And that comes with the conversation to you. They call you, hey, this is what I'm sitting on, or this is what my portfolio is. Talk to the CPA, and you guys as a 3-headed monster kind of take over and find out if this is the right fit for where they're at, which is perfect. So thank you very much for clarifying that one. All right, we're going to jump into like the last little bit. We got a couple questions here for you. They're more or less kind of on timing. So I own a fourplex. I'm looking to sell. When would I get in contact with you? What would be the best time in terms of what you need from me to get in contact for you to make this a seamless, or as seamless as possible, transaction?
The best time to get your exchange account set up is once you have a signed contract. That would allow us plenty of time to get everything arranged. Once you have a signed contract, we'd have you fill out some forms. We'd establish your exchange account and reach out to the closing agent that's handling the closing to get a copy of the contract and title. And then from there, we prepare our exchange documents. We're available evenings and weekends, and that's mostly due to the fact that, again, we're talking about calendar days. So if your 45th day ends on Christmas and you need to make sure that we received it, or that that you've done it correctly, you can call us, and all of our phones ring at the same time. So,
and just to piggyback off of that, so is there things that, all right, I'm selling my fourplex. I know I want to do a 1031 exchange. To get an offer on the table, is there some, I guess, what's the timeline in terms of how much time you need to get this done? Because if someone's going to buy in cash and they can close in 20 days or 30 days, obviously that's a quick turnaround, but just to be aware, like, I'm going to sell my fourplex, I should say closing date 2 months out, just to make sure we have enough time.
Well, an exchange will never extend your closing date.
Mm-hmm.
So client calls us and tells us this is the date that we're closing. That's the date that we're going to be ready by.
That's good to know.
Especially right now, I'm noticing a lot of much shorter time periods from contract signing to closing.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing actually just this past week, I saw escrow periods of 14 days because it's an all-cash deal.
Yeah.
So, we usually say once you've got that signed contract, get it set up. At least then you're ready for whenever closing happens. But even if you were closing tomorrow, we could still accommodate it. What we can't accommodate is if you call us after closing. If you call us and say, I just closed a couple hours ago and I want to do a 1031 exchange, you've missed the opportunity to do the exchange. Your exchange account needs to be set up before closing. The funds need to come to us.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you disqualify yourself.
Hopefully you don't get too many of those calls.
We get enough.
Really? That's unfortunate.
I just got one this morning, and he said,
really?
I didn't know about the exchange, and was really pushing, hoping that there was something that could be done, but unfortunately there's not.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is next one, now he knows about it, you can help him out. And I actually forgot to ask you about this. How many times can you use a 1031 exchange? Because I know that you can do this multiple times, correct?
You can use a 1031 exchange as many times as you want. Ultimately, what's really important is that you've held the property, that you've had the intent to hold the property. So if you are purchasing a property and selling it and doing an exchange, and then selling that one and doing an exchange, that might look a little curious. Mm-hmm. But you can do as many exchanges as you'd like. There's no limit.
Yeah. So when this guy goes to sell this property, he won't forget about you. And after that, every other time he rolls over to the next property, I'm sure he will not forget.
Hope not.
I hope not, for his sake.
Right.
No, that is great. I feel really bad for that guy.
I do too.
I'm like, I want to ask what was his tax liability on that one, but I'm going to guess on that one.
Yeah.
So during that time, I'm selling my fourplex. Lauren, I'm going to do a 1031 exchange. What are some things that I need to do or be aware of before the sale happens, and then also after the sale happens?
Yeah, so we always try to run down the largest requirements in an exchange, because they typically cover every transaction. Get your exchange account set up before closing. Know that after closing, you have 45 days to identify. You have a total of 180 calendar days to purchase that replacement. You need to make sure, of course, that you've had the intent to hold the property, and you have the intent to hold the replacement property. Like kind comes up quite a bit. A lot of people ask, well, if I'm selling a single-family home, can I buy a condo? Yes, as long as the intent requirement is met. Mm-hmm. So you can be selling any type of real property and be buying any other type of real property, as long as it will be used for rental income, appreciation, or use in a trade or business. Same taxpayer requirement is important. That means that the taxpayer that has been holding the relinquished property and selling the relinquished property is the same taxpayer that's going to be purchasing the replacement property. You're the one doing the exchange. You need to be the one to finish the exchange by purchasing that replacement. There are a couple entity structures that come up quite a bit. A single member LLC, which is a disregarded entity, and a fully revocable grantor trust, which is typically a disregarded entity, is usually considered one and the same with yourself, and so you could sell in your name and buy in one of those entities, and you have fulfilled the same taxpayer requirement.
That's a good note.
Another big misunderstanding with exchanges is the reinvestment requirement. To have a fully tax-deferred exchange, you need to reinvest your full net sales price. And your full net sales price is the gross sales price, so the agreed-upon price between the buyer and the seller, minus routine closing costs like broker's commission, title insurance, closing agent fees. And what you're left with is your net sales price. From there, the closing agent's going to pay off any debt that you have. The rest would come to us. But to have a fully tax-deferred exchange, you need to reinvest all of the cash, and you need to reinvest that debt amount that you just paid off, so that you are trading equal or up in value based on that net sales price. So that's extremely important. A lot of people think that they only have to reinvest their gain, or they only have to reinvest their net proceeds, and that's not accurate. So those are some of the top requirements. Again, as you have a conversation with someone, there might be a few things that they might say that might lead the conversation into another direction, but those are ones that we consistently like to make sure clients are aware of.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you highlighted those two items, the like kind, because I know that comes up all the time, and then the equal or above value. Two key things that I appreciate you bringing up and bringing your highlighter on that one. So can't stress that enough, I'm sure. All right, let's move into the last question. Do you want to take this one? This is the DIY one. This is
Yeah.
yours. All right. So we've gone through pretty much all the X's and O's of the 1031 exchange. We're going to wrap it up with one final just fun question. Natasha loves this one.
I do.
So I'm going to let her ask it.
So, Lauren, what has been your favorite DIY project or your most recent DIY project that you're working on?
Yeah, so right now we are working on getting our house ready for sale. And that it's been a labor of love. You know, it's the first home we bought as a family. You know, you have an emotional connection with real estate in some instances, and we certainly do. So we've just been updating and cleaning out, you know, all the stuff that we've accumulated over the past 7 years. So we'll be looking to sell it next spring, but it hasn't been easy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I can believe it. My husband is a hoarder and I am a purger, so we continuously battle on that ground almost daily.
Well, hopefully the DIY projects aren't too strenuous for you and you get everything set. You said in the spring is when you're looking to sell?
Yeah, we're looking at the spring, but right now we're kind of in the cleanup stage, and my goodness, you just really don't realize how much you've put into a house, especially as you upgrade into larger and larger homes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we started out in a little townhouse. Now I think back, and we really had nothing. And then we just filled this void with other stuff that we probably don't even need anymore.
Go through boxes that you haven't opened in 10 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
At one point, it was a good idea to keep this stuff because I'm going to use it one day.
Yeah, we have a itty bitty tiny little 740 square foot house, so we don't have places for stuff and things, which makes me very happy. Makes my husband not so happy. He has the garage.
Use that as the man cave. Well, awesome. I appreciate your time, Lauren. The tidbits and the information that you gave, I'm sure are going to help people. I learned something again today. I know I've talked to you before on it, but every single time we talk, I learn something new about the wonderful world of 1031 exchanges. So I appreciate everything that you offered, and thanks for spending the time with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
We will talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. That was Lauren Speidel talking about 1031 exchanges. Hopefully everybody found something useful in that. Like she said, you don't have to have this massive portfolio. You just have to be motivated and have the intent to do it, and she will have a solution for you. Just make sure that your timing works. Make sure you talk to her early and often if you're thinking about using this tax option. It is beneficial, so I highly suggest at least having a conversation with Lauren. I know we talked offline about it. She is open to any and all conversations, so don't be shy in terms of contacting her if you're even contemplating the idea of doing a 1031 exchange. We are going to leave her contact information in the show notes down below. If you want to get in contact with her, you can go directly to Lauren. Otherwise, you can also reach out to us. We'll get you in contact with her. Always happy to share our network of people and support that we can offer other people. So don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. Natasha, do you have anything to round this out?
Don't forget that we're on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, yeah, big news. iHeartRadio.
Apple Podcast. Facebook, Instagram. Yeah, we're all over.
We are. It's exciting to see.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, by the way. That is all Natasha. So if you don't know, that is all Natasha leading that one. I am not the tech guru by any means.
Oh, I'm not either. I'm just trying to doggy paddle.
No, you're doing a great job. So, yeah, thanks again for taking the time out to listen. Hopefully you found something useful. We will be back at it this week, filming the next show, which I'm excited about. We're going Fridays, right?
I think so.
So we'll see you on Friday. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all.